something, you love it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves all His creation. And He, by His design, has put people in different roles in this life. And we have to understand that and respect that. Another verse in Urdu poetry is Adمیت, احترام آدمی, باخبر شو از مقام آدمی, which means to the real humanity is to respect another human being. Be aware of the status of a man. You have to realize that man has a certain status and standing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the two verses that I quoted, there, if I simply translate it in simple English and simple Urdu, then I will convey the message that I wanted to convey today. The verse says that Zindagani hai sadaf, your life is like an oyster. Qatra Nesan hai Khudi, and a drop of water, rainwater, is your inner being. In other words, if you are a shell, if you can remember the oyster that is in the ocean, CP, oyster is like two dishes, and one drop of water, a couple of drops go in and he closes his mouth, and then pearls develop inside. As long as the oyster closes its mouth, then the chemical reaction within itself, in the shell, develops that water into a pearl. Similarly, this poet is telling us that your body is like that oyster, and in you there is a drop. There is something that came from a different area, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, different realm of life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put a little bit of special light inside you, special nur inside you, ruh that came from Him when He breathed into you. So that ruh is something that you have to develop and make pearls out of it, just like the oyster does. So you have to realize there is something within you that you have to develop. Now let me translate the rest of it. He says, Zindagani hai sadaf, life is like the oyster, Qatra Nesan hai Khudi, and your spiritual being is like the drop of water. Wo sadaf kya? What good is that oyster? Jo qatre ko bohar kar na sake, that cannot make that drop into pearls. He says, it's sad to talk about that particular oyster that cannot make pearls out of that. He says, Ho agar khud negaro, khud garo, khud gir khudi. If your inner being can see itself, catch hold of itself and develop itself, ये भी मुमकिन है कि तू मौत से भी मर ना सके. Then it's possible that even with this death that you have, after your physical death occurs in this earth, even then you will not perish and you will live on forever and ever. That is a spiritual kind of a very advanced kind of a learning. But simply put, it's possible when you develop yourself spiritually to the extent that your inner spiritual being is really fully aware of itself and connects to its creator, then you can have an eternal life and you can truly be Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses you to serve His creation. And after you're gone from here, somebody might see you 500 years from today walking around, taking care of things, and you wouldn't even know that this person who had died so long ago, I mean, still going around here and there. But that's again not very easy for everybody to accept. However, you know the story of Khidr alayhi salam. He's there and he has a long life, and sometimes somehow or the other he helps people now, even though he was gone a long time ago. But anyway, it's possible for all of us to be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, develop ourselves spiritually, and then be able to do things that may be extraordinary. Not everybody can do that, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses the people that He picks and then gets his work done through human beings. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He wants to help me or you, He uses somebody from here that will do whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to receive. And we may or may not be able to connect it, but then again, those who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala get that kind of a privilege. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the understanding that this is something that human beings are created for. And unless we understand our mission, and unless we really understand why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent us to this universe, we will not have accomplished our mission. Now, let me reflect on the situation on the globe in this world today and see how, if you can put it in proper perspective, how you can understand how things are happening that did not make any kind of you could not really calculate, or you could not at that time foresee that this is going to happen. Just imagine 50 years ago, very few Muslims were in America, maybe 60 years ago or so. Then Islam started to come here. Muslims started to come here, and they were a minority. Many of them were at that time even afraid to call themselves Muslims. But some did, and gradually the population of Muslims started to grow. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised His beloved prophets, the final messenger, that every coming day will be better for you. And He said, وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ, I have, for your sake, elevated your zikr. Can you imagine that His zikr was being taken place in Islamic countries, and yet Islam was not across the globe yet? So now, to fulfill that promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Muslims are here now. Now, as they became a sizable kind of a minority and recognizable, they started to build masajid and they started to do open worship, mashallah. Suddenly, things started to happen somewhere where Islam became a subject of discussion. I go back to Barack Obama. If Barack Obama, his father was a Muslim, his mother was a local Christian American lady. If his mother was also a Muslim and his father was also a Muslim, he could never become the president at the time. So he called himself a Christian, and his father had gone back, was no longer an influence around him, although the political people here started to kind of call him a Muslim and try to put him down. And yet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's design was to get the discussion started about Islam. His middle name is Hussein, so he cannot get rid of that name. And he said he's not a Muslim and he's Christian, and he went to churches and all that stuff. And yet, Islam was being discussed in a very safe situation. Now comes after that another president. Of course, I cannot mention names here, but you know what I'm talking about. And that person started to have all kinds of anti-Muslim things, and no Muslim can come here, and I'll bar everybody coming here and all that. The thing was, discussion was taking place about Islam. Those people who we should know are going to oppose us for being exposed to us. Now we could recognize who is the one that does not want us here. So he brought out all those people in his party, and we knew where our problems are. Suddenly, all of that became a minority, and the Islamic voice started to increase. Unfortunately, then came the situation in Gaza, where Islam, of course, was being persecuted, Muslims were being persecuted, and not many people could physically go and help them. Sacrifices made by them made it very clear that when a believer, especially Muslim, believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's protection, they trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they'll take all kinds of hardship, but they will not waver in their faith system. They then brought Islam into American general public. Everybody that sees what is happening there now realizes that Islam has a power, Islam has a conviction and a connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is something you cannot ignore. All I am saying is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's design to make things happen the way they are happening today. As long as we understand that He's in charge, He's in control of everything, we should trust Him, be comfortable with ourselves and do what we can do to spread His divine message and help His creation. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us on the right path, keep us steadfast in propagating the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and hoping that people that have not received correct message of Islam, they will get the true picture and be able to join